Welcome. My name is Savannah, and I'm here to introduce our Course 619 Ethics Debate over Punishment in ABA. Our group members include Sarah, Belina, Christina, Emily, and Dana. Each member of the group took a stance on the use of punishment. The members that researched the use of for the use of punishment were myself, Sarah, and Christina, and those that researched it against were Belina, Emily, and Dana. Punishment has and continues to be an ethical debate within the field of ABA. Punishment is considered to be a stimulus that is a non-reinforcer that is used to decrease a behavior. And that is from Splodin from 2002. The BCBA board also has placed ethical codes for the behavior analysts and registered behavioral technicians to follow in regards to punishment. Some of the codes pertain to the use of punishment. If punishment is to be used in a behavior plan, one must get the client's consent, which is code 3.03. Prior to getting consent, there needs to be considerations of every other form of treatment before using punishment. This is also another code listed on the BCBA's website. Some research on the use of punishment has also said that problem behaviors decrease at a faster rate when using both reinforcement and punishment, and that's from Hanley, as well with several other researchers. Where other researchers believe that the removal of reinforcement can cause an extinction burst in those problem behaviors, and that's Hobbs and Goswick. We will continue to discuss the use of punishment in ABA as we pass it on to the rest of the researchers here at this debate. We are now going to move on to Belina, who is one of our summarizers for the use of punishment and why we should use it.
Hi, I would like to start this summary by telling a short story that happened recently at the place I work at. We're trying so hard to teach this little kid to get our attention appropriately by calling our names. So when he finally did it, we got so excited, completely forgetting he doesn't like praise and cheers. Accidentally, we punished the behavior we worked so hard on changing. So, what is punishment? Punishment is the consequence or the response that follows a behavior with the sole purpose of decreasing the behavior. Skinner, the founder of modern behaviorism, not only applied punishment in his research, but also stated that punishers weaken behavior. However, regardless of everything said or done, there is a stigma associated with this topic. Punishment is always considered something negative and abusive. And given my example above, punishment can also be something positive, like a praise that can act as an unpleasant event for some. Also, punishment is considered delivering negative emotions to the individuals, but so does the reinforcement procedure. What happens when the reinforcer is being withheld because the procedure criterion has not been met? Also, as with reinforcement, punishment punishes the behavior, not the individual. There is something else very important that we must keep in mind. Even if we don't contrive negative situations, punishment can happen naturally too. Everything is based on the choices we make. If we make good choices, we can expect good things happening to us. And if we make bad choices, then the outcome will be negative. So, keeping this in mind, it is important for us to study how punishment works. That's for three simple reasons. As I stated above, it happens naturally. When it happens naturally, it cannot be stopped, and it happens quite frequently. For example, let's mention some everyday life events. You press snooze on your alarm, you will most probably be late for work. You forget the jacket at home. You might get a cold when you go outside. Or you start drinking hot coffee, you burn your tongue. We study punishment to gain knowledge so we can avoid all these possible situations from happening, or at least to prepare ourselves. Now let's talk about one of the most controversial topics in ABA, the necessity of the punishment behavior. The researchers have shown that punishment reduces problem behavior. If a behavior is followed by a negative consequence, that behavior is less likely to reoccur in the future. While it is widely discussed that reinforcement procedures are ethical and promote um, positive impact on the individuals, recent studies have found that reinforcement is more effective when it's paired with punishment. Also, in some cases, like self-injurious behavior, property destruction, or other aggressive behavior towards other people, punishment is unavoidable. So now I'm going to pass it to Emily, who is our summarizer for the use of punishment, for the use against punishment. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I just wanted to start off by talking about the two main types of punishment. So there's positive punishment and negative punishment. Positive punishment is what occurs when a behavior is followed immediately by the presentation of a stimulus. This is also known as type 1 punishment. An example of this would be if you slammed the door and your mom yelled at you. Your mom is presenting the stimulus, which is yelling, and your behavior was slamming the door, and that decreases the likelihood of you slamming the door again in the future. Negative punishment, on the other hand, occurs when a behavior is followed immediately by the removal of a stimulus. This is also known as type 2 punishment. So an example of negative punishment could be sending a child to his room if he refuses to stop playing his video games. So the parent is removing the preferred stimulus, which is the video game or any of the toys in that room, after he exhibits the behavior, which is refusing to stop playing his game. And so that decreases the likelihood that the child will refuse to stop playing the video game in the future. Punishment can be a time-consuming procedure, and it has to be carefully planned out if you want to put one of these procedures in place. Once it's implemented, the punishment procedure must be continued until the behavior is completely repressed. If the punishment is discontinued before repression, the effects are usually not permanent and recovery from punishment can occur. Recovery is when the challenging behavior reemerges, and it can even be more severe than it was when you first implemented the procedure. Punishment can also be a delicate procedure, and its effectiveness is easily impacted by several factors. These include immediacy. In order to be effective, the punishment must occur directly after the target behavior. So if the punishment is delayed, the client may be unsure of what behavior is being punished, and it won't be as effective. Another factor is intensity. So the more intense a stimulus is, the more likely it is to reduce further responding. This is why punishment is such a controversial topic in ABA, because a very intense stimuli, such as electric shock or restraints, might be the more effective procedure, but they also might not be the most ethical solution. Lastly, schedule is another factor that can affect punishment. So continuous punishment, which is punishing every single occurrence of the behavior, will bring faster response suppression. But the problem is when the punishment contingency is removed, the possibility for rapid recovery is more likely. Continuous punishment is also much more time consuming for the staff or family members who are trying to implement it. Punishment also has several side effects to consider when we're determining if it's the right procedure to use. Punishment can evoke aggressive behavior, especially if a strongly aversive stimuli is being used. In addition, escape and avoidance are likely to increase as the intensity of a punisher increases. A client may increase rates of the target behavior if the punishment procedure allows them to escape. For example, sending a student to their room for not completing a math problem is allowing them to escape from doing their math homework, so this behavior might increase instead of decrease. When the behavior is not being punished, the rate of the behavior may increase. This classic example that we see in the field of ABA is when a client is being punished for a behavior at the clinic, but not at home or at school. When used alone, punishment does not teach the learner what to do, only what not to do. This can cause the child to develop their own replacement behavior, which may be more inappropriate than the original behavior was. There are 3 research articles, Patterson 1982, Patterson, Reed, and Dishon 1992, and Sprague and Walker 2000, which explored the reasoning behind antisocial and violent behavior in youth. The results of this study showed that there's a strong correlation between exposure to punishment and antisocial and violent behavior. The use of punishment also brings up several ethical concerns. First, all clients have a right to safe and humane treatment. Punishment, if it's not implemented correctly can easily become a dangerous and inhumane intervention. A least restrictive alternative should always be sought before resorting to punishment procedures, as clients also have the right to the least restrictive treatment available. Finally, clients also have a right to effective treatment, and when punishment procedures are not implemented correctly or safely, they are not the most effective. And now I'll hand it over to our illustrator, Dana.
So one of the issues that we ran into while we were researching both the use of punishment or using reinforcement-only procedures in this debate was that there was so much more research done that included either just punishment or it was punishment in a combination with reinforcement. But there weren't as many articles out there that were reinforcement only. So I'm gonna skip to a slide show that I put together to kind of demonstrate what exactly that looks like. One second. All right. So in an article that was done by Matson and Taurus in 1989, they compared different articles that were published from 27 journals, all of which were behavioral, and they looked at the different types of interventions that were used for behaviors. They found a total of 382 articles, but from these 47 intervention methods were identified. Of those 47 intervention methods, only 10 of them were reinforcement only. The rest were either just punishment or it was punishment with a combination of reinforcement. So this kind of shows that the research that's been done, only 26% of it has even looked at reinforcement only as a type of intervention. But it should be noted that this doesn't necessarily talk about the effectiveness of each type of intervention, just what interventions have been used. Also, this study was done in 1989, which means it was done almost 20 years ago. And while it's the best comprehensive view of different interventions, it is outdated in the sense that more currently culture shifts towards using behavioral support systems or positive behavior support and looking more towards reinforcement. In this graph, you can see the years that they looked at for the articles, starting in 1967, going up to 1987. And this just demonstrates the use of punishment procedures. There's a spike in the 80s, but then after that, it slowly decreased as they stopped using things like electric shock therapy as one of the biggest components that no longer is used by most clinicians. Another article that was done by Kelly and Barnes in 2015 shows the difference between how behavior analysts view anti-punishment procedures versus mainstream education. And this just goes to show again that within the behavioral community, there is more of a shift towards pro-reinforcement rather than using punishment first as a way to deal with challenging behaviors. This is a table summary from that same study that shows the different types of positive behavior support systems, which is a reinforcement-only intervention, and how often it's being used and in what type of severity and rate. This is used for different schools. It's also being used within ABA clinics. One of the fears that people have when it comes to using punishment procedures is that it will create undesired behaviors that are just a different version of what they're trying to decrease. But the same studies that Matson and Taurus did in 1989 show that with punishment procedures, there are still more positive outcomes than there are negative outcomes. And one of the fears that people have for using reinforcement only is that it might take too long or it might not be as effective. But for any type of behavior that you're trying to decrease, it will always get worse before it gets better. And there will always be an extinction burst. The difference is just having this trained professionals to know which behaviors to reinforce and which ones they need to ignore. And now we're going to go to Krista, who's going to go through some of the research for punishment procedures.
All right. So there are two types of punishment, positive and negative. Positive punishment is when a stimulus is added after the behavior that decreases the likelihood of the behavior occurring in the future. And negative punishment is when a stimulus is taken away after the behavior and decreases the likelihood of the behavior occurring in the future. There are numerous studies researching the use of punishment in applied behavior analysis. Contrary to common belief that punishment has a negative effect on clients, whether physically or emotionally, however, punishment can be deemed ethical by the removal or addition of a stimulus after a behavior has occurred. In a study conducted by Hanley, Piazza, and Fisher in 2005, an assessment sequence was utilized to find effective, individualized, and preferred treatments for individuals with severe challenging behaviors. The two methods utilized in the study was functional communication training alone and functional communication training with punishment. The results of the study were functional communication training alone minimized challenging behaviors, but functional communication training and punishment was more effective at reducing challenging behaviors. A concurrent change agreement was used to find the preferred treatment of those studied, and results were that the participants preferred functional communication training and punishment rather than functional communication training alone. Findings suggest that person-centered and evidence-based planning allow for a more guided treatment selection. Hanley, Piazza, and Fisher in 2005 suggest that continued research on findings that lead to more effective punishers while minimizing the aversiveness of situations in which punishment is delivered, and these research findings could lead to better interventions for the most severe challenging behaviors. In another study conducted by Thompson, Owada, Connors, and Roscoe in 1999, the study proposed to evaluate punishment procedures, which were reprimands or brief manual restraints, for self-injurious behaviors when access to reinforcement for alternative behaviors, which was manipulating leisure materials, when available and not available. The results were that punishment decreased responses when reinforcement was available for alternative behaviors. In a literature review done by Vollmer in 2002, he reviewed a literature paper written by Lerman and Vordran, also in 2002. Lerman and Vordran in 2002 discussed existing research on punishment and called for additional research to be conducted. Vollmer's article on the literature review states that the literature paper written by Lerman and Vordran should not be seen as controversial because punishment is a natural occurring phenomenon, and ignoring it would be ignoring the physical nature of the universe. Lastly, Vollmer's literature review in 2002 states that a science and technology of behavior are incomplete without the research of punishment.
In addition to these facts, response blocking, redirection, mild reprimand, and physical guidance are components of applied behavior analysis that are commonly written into behavior plans by behavior analysts. These components often function as punishment procedures in errorless learning methods, and these methods would not be possible without these techniques. Failure to call these procedures punishment would be a failure of behavior analytic technology, which is one of the 7 key pillars written by Bear, Wolf, and Risley in 1968.
So Krista talked earlier about the Lerman and Vordran article, which was published in 2002. I just wanted to talk about that one a little bit more. So this article recognizes that punishment can be an effective tool when it's used in ABA, but it emphasizes that more research is necessary in order to develop the most effective punishment procedures. The article states that much of the basic research on the direct effects of punishment was conducted more than 30 years ago, and these studies were also largely performed on non-human subjects. So more recent studies and studies that are done on more relevant populations to us in the ABA field are necessary. In most clinical studies on punishment, the function of the behavior being punished was not determined prior to beginning treatment. So in the field of ABA, we know that finding the function of a behavior is an essential step to treatment, so it's important for research to reflect this in order to be considered relevant. In addition, generality of these previous research findings might be limited because data on effective treatments are more likely to be published than unsuccessful ones. So the second study that I wanted to talk a little bit about was one by Reed and Lovett from 2008. And it was a national sample of members of a professional behavior analysis organization, and it discussed their views on ethics and efficacy of punishment. So the respondents indicated that consent and administrative approval are not enough to make punishment procedures ethical. Punishment should be reserved for more dangerous behaviors. Punishment procedures have more negative side effects and are less effective than reinforcement procedures. And aversive components are embedded into many supposedly non-aversive procedures. Similarly to the first study I discussed, this study also emphasized that there is a lack of empirical research done on punishment in comparison to the vast amount of research done on reinforcement. And this makes it difficult for professionals in our field to make informed decisions about when to use punishment instead of reinforcement. There were some limitations to this study that are worth noting. First, response rate was relatively low at 29.4%, which could have altered the findings. Additionally, respondents were members of the Association for Behavior Analysis, so the results of this study may not be generalizable to people who are not members of the ABA community, such as the general public. Finally, even though respondents are presumed to have knowledge about punishment, they may have varied understanding of the terminology used.
So in addition to what Emily said, many alternatives to punishment procedures have been identified in literature. Many research has been published on function-based treatments in studies such as Fisher, Piazza, and Page, 1989, Awada, Page, and Dorsey et al., 1994, and Piazza, Hanley, and Fisher, 1996, just to name some. Function-based treatment packages containing components such as non-contingent reinforcement and extinction have been effective in treating challenging behaviors. Thus, punishment is not necessary on many occasions. Okay, this concludes the informal debate on the topic for and against punishment in applied behavior analysis. We will now move forward with some questions. As the fielder, I will be mediating this question and answer session. So my first question is for the punishment argument. And the question is, the word punishment sometimes has a strong negative connotation when talked about conversationally in society. In the argument for the use of punishment in applied behavior analysis settings, what would be an appropriate way to address these notions?
I'll go ahead and answer. An appropriate way to address the notions that the word punishment is seen as negative is by explaining what punishment is. That punishment is the removal or addition of a stimulus that reduces the likelihood of a behavior occurring in the future. Punishment is natural, it happens every day, whether individuals realize it or not. It is important to explain that punishment is meant to reduce or eliminate inappropriate behaviors while teaching appropriate replacement behaviors. Punishment is not used to cause harm to clients, rather a learning tool just like reinforcement.
All right, thanks, Krista. I have one more question for the use of punishment in ABA, and this question is, when talking about undesirable side effects of punishment, these seem like a pretty major risk for a punishment intervention. The core ethical principles state that a behavior analyst must do no harm in all situations. In your opinion, at what point does punishment stop being worth the risk?
I'll go ahead and answer again. Side effects of punishment tend to arise when the application of the punishment is done incorrectly. I think that if you feel like you are causing any harm to the client, that the procedure should be immediately stopped and reevaluated. Punishment procedures should be implemented when all other options have been exhausted, such as reinforcement procedures. To be ethical and abide by the ethical code set forth by the BACB, it is important that punishment procedures are doing no harm to the client and that all of the procedures were used and exhausted.
All right, thanks, Krista. The next question is for the against the use of punishment in applied behavior analysis. So when considering the do no harm ethical principle, if a client is engaging in severe self-injurious behavior and literature supports punishment in combination with reinforcement interventions, would you consider it unethical to use punishment in this case?
So I think there are a lot of other options that you can use in this case. Just for example, research has also shown that self-injurious behaviors and other high-severity challenging behaviors can be decreased by the use of function-based interventions alone. So I think that, as Krista said earlier, you should always consider the least restrictive option before you use punishment.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And my final question is, interventions using reinforcement seem to be typically the primary goal for applied behavior analysts, though punishment is typically written into behavior plans in the form of overcorrection, response blocking, and redirection, as I mentioned earlier. Do you truly believe that punishment procedures could be completely written out of ABA for good, and how would you propose doing this?
I don't think that punishment procedures ever need to be eliminated from ABA. I just think that we should always look for the least restrictive intervention to use before we even get to that point. So for example, there are many response prompts that may be implemented, such as verbal instructions or physical guidance, that do not allow a learner to engage in an incorrect response that would require a punishment procedure. So least to most prompting strategies should be used, I think, before punishment procedures are considered.
Okay, this concludes the question and answer portion of this informal debate. We really enjoyed researching and filming this topic. Thank you all for watching, and good luck on final exams.